good sticks, everyone? Welcome to the Captain Avalanche Fancast, your unofficial source for all things Colorado Avalanche hockey and more from a fan perspective, hosted by me, Captain Avalanche Corey, and it's just one of those days, Dom. Now, we're no insiders. We're not inside the locker room face-to-face with our favorite players, but we hope to create a relatable and welcoming environment because we're just like all of you listening. Fans with a deep passion for the game of hockey, and in this case, the Colorado Avalanche. I really do hope this is no one's first time listening because today's episode is going to be a much quieter and much less exciting one, in my opinion, because I am missing my incredibly valuable and amazing co-host, Dom. He has been doing a great battle with the flu the last few days and does not feel that his voice can handle an hour and a half, 2 hour long conversation about hockey, which I totally understand. He didn't quite feel that he was ready to push himself, but I do have some of his notes, and I, of course, do have his blessing to record this episode so we can still get it out to all of you on time, because, of course, we want you to hear what we all got to say at the time that you have expected every week. But you might be saying, Corey, what are you talking about? This episode is late anyway, you absolute bum. It's coming out on a Friday, not a Thursday. And there is a very good reason for that, everyone. It is because on Wednesday night, I happened to be attending the Avalanche versus Devils live. So, of course, was collecting some live analysis at that game. And, of course, by the time I got home, I believe it was around 11 p.m. And Dom gets up very early for work the next morning. So I do want to be respectful of his time and his schedule. But I, of course, did not want to delay this episode any further than it already has. Now, I will say it feels like I might be coming down with something myself, so I'm hoping that is not the case, and I wake up fully healthy tomorrow. But nonetheless, we got his notes, we got his blessing. Dom, we miss you greatly, and we will look forward to having him back next week for everything that we're going to talk about, because if I check my calendar real quick, let's see here. We won't quite make it, but next Wednesday, the 5th, will be 2 days away from the trade deadline. So we'll hope that we start to see some movement. Now, I will say I'm kind of bummed that I don't have Dom for this episode because I got a nice beefy segment that I would have loved to have some of his banter on, but frankly, it is a lot. I'm scrolling through it and I wrote, 12 double-spaced pages here of just thoughts and analysis on the Avs as a whole. So this ought to be a good time, but I think it's something that I wanted to talk about more than just game analysis. So everyone, welcome to the 5 Stages of Avalanche. After dropping their first 2 games back from the Four Nations break, I think I have finally come to an epiphany about this current Avalanche roster. From reviewing the old episodes of this podcast and listening carefully to the points that I reiterate over and over again, this team has clearly put me through the 5 stages of grief. It is important to note that when dealing with and going through these 5 stages, that they are not always traditionally gone through in the order that I am presenting them, but for the sake of simplicity, I will discuss each stage as it is traditionally written in literature. Stage 1, denial.
I'm in denial.
I was in denial that the Avalanche had a depth problem, and I have done my damnedest to argue against it, even comparing this current roster to the 21-22 Avalanche, but it's beginning to look more and more like last year's Tampa Bay Lightning, with Nikita Kucherov leading the way and the next closest point scorer being 54 points away. Nathan MacKinnon is currently leading the Avs in the NHL with 87 points, now 90 after the Devils games, and the next closest forward being Artturi Lehkonen, who is 53 points behind him. Mind you, he did have an injury to start the season. The next highest point scorer on the Avs is a defenseman. That defenseman is Cale Makar, a truly generational talent, but the point remains that this Avalanche team is currently receiving very limited secondary scoring. You currently have 13 players on your roster with over 10 points. That's good. However, you only have 4 players with 20 goals or more, including Martin Necas, and 3 with 10 or more, and then a harsh drop-off amongst the rest of the team. This might sound good on paper, however, there are a few things to consider. One is I believe I misread my data from before when I presented this because the 21-22 Avs had 21 players with 10 points or more between forwards and defensemen, and including those brought over at the deadline like Arturi Lehkonen, Josh Manson, Nico Sturm, and Andrew Cogliano. Fun fact, that team was also injured to shit. Not quite to the same degree that this team has been in recent seasons, but the 21-22 season saw literally 0 players on the Avalanche play all 82 games. But the team was so unbelievably deep that it didn't matter because every line on that team was a scoring threat. It didn't matter who you put out there because any of the 4 lines could score, and for good measure, that team had 7 players with 20 goals or more. This current roster has only 7 players with a minimum of 10, and one of them is not named Casey Middlestat. Once again, has changed. I wrote this all before the Devils game, which, man, we could talk about it a little bit after this, but just funny stuff. While it seems like this team is trending in the right direction, the broadcast against the Blues will tell you that no one not named McKinnon, Makar, Netchis, Lehkonen, Druin, and sometimes Taves is scoring. In fact, the last time someone outside of that circle within the Avs forward core scored was a goal by Joel Kiviranta against the St. Louis Blues on January 31st. A garbage time goal after the team was already up 4-0. We go back further and find that the entire month of January, anyone outside the Avs' top 6, and in that top 6, not including Casey Middlestat and Juuso Parssinen, these players, depth players, scored 11 goals. That is 11 goals out of a total of 45 goals in January. We include February, despite a 4 Nations break, and because we aren't including defensemen in this exercise, the depth forwards have scored 0 goals in the month of February. Again, this is not considering the Devils game. With the Avalanche's last game of the month being against the Devils, which isn't being included as I write this, but I guarantee you they probably didn't score in this game either, which, egg on my face, I was wrong. But again, the team was already up 3-1 by the time Casey Middlestat and Logan O'Connor added those goals. But it is important that we'll deviate a little bit here. It is important that they scored nonetheless. I swear every time I write something like this, where I get on the depth, all of a sudden everybody will show out and have an incredible game. So I'm glad to see that the depth did score, but they didn't step up to me when they needed to. They need to be stepping up when the game is tight, when it's close, because at the end of the day, that top line cannot be on the ice 100% of the time. It's not possible. And yet they've had to incur a much larger workload because these depth forwards are not scoring. So when you're not scoring, they feel like they have to throw Nathan McKinnon and everybody else out there even more to try and make sure they can at least get a goal on the board. But I digress. Let me grab a drink of water. So that adds nothing to the depth goal total and brings the overall goal total to 58, meaning that from the turn of the new year, depth forwards have scored 18% of the goals. This gets even worse when you begin to separate out individual players who are simply not making a contribution. In case that previous number somehow looked good to you, and to give you a general summary, 72% of the Avalanche's scoring since the turn of the new year has come from someone named McKinnon, Makar, Netchis, Druin, Lehkonen, or Taves sometimes. And again, very rarely Taves. He has not been a heavy scorer this year, a couple of assists, but not a lot of scoring from his end. So a little fruitless to honestly add Taves to this, but and that's not to make fun of Taves. He's more of a disruptive and takeaway defenseman. He's not necessarily there to provide a ton of offense, but he can chip in here. But here, I'll make it worse. Looking at the season thus far, and for this exercise, we'll factor in Mikko Rantanen and keep the same names from before. The team as a whole on the season has scored 187 goals for. Of these 187, 108 have been scored by the players mentioned, or nearly 58% of the team's goals. But let's reorient this a little bit. After all, I am talking about depth forwards and not including all the defensemen, but keep including Cale Makar. And all this is coming out, I think, a bit more confusing than I would like. So instead, let's look at the Avalanche's top forward group this year, which has seen a lot of shakeup. In a perfect world, the top line would be McKinnon, Rantanen, Lehkonen, and the second line would be Druin, Nichushkin, and Middlestat. With injuries and trades, this isn't what it looks like now, but Netchis hasn't been on the team long enough to be honestly contributing to the totals yet. And Rantanen still leads the team in goals at 25, so it makes sense to technically still include him. If we count all goals scored by this forward group, including call-ups, the Avs have dressed 42 skaters this season, by the way, and subtracting Netchis, the forwards as a whole have scored 147 goals. An important note is that none of the AHL call-ups the Avalanche made this year have scored a goal except Chris Wagner, who scored one off a feed from McKinnon, and none of the AHL call-ups even scored a point besides TJ Tynan with 1 assist. Anyways, of all these goals, the top 6 for the Avs is contributing 95 of those goals, or almost 65% of the goals. If you factor out Casey Middlestad's 9 goals, that's still 58% of the goal share, and Nichushkin and Drouin have been injured most of this season. So you have to think that if those two had had a fully healthy year, that the totals would be even worse. And if we take them out, it's still 47% of the goal share between just 3 forwards. And one of them isn't even on the team anymore. We compare this to the Avalanche's top 6 in 21-22. That group comprised of a top line of Mikko Rantanen, Nathan McKinnon, and Gabriel Landeskog. Beautiful times. And a second line of Nazem Kadri, Valeri Nichushkin, and JT Compher. You could argue Andrei Burakovsky too, but we'll go with what I just mentioned. This team scored 308 goals. The forward core scored 244 goals. Of the top 6 I mentioned, they accounted for 69% of that forward group goal share. But Corey, you say, that's even more than the top 6 this year. Yes. However, if you look at the top line alone, like we did in the previous calculation, the 21-22 top line only accounted for 40% of the forwards' goal share, and the only 4 forwards on that team that did not, and there were only 4 forwards on that team that did not register a point. I can keep spreading the numbers around and cherry picking all I want. The point in this matter is timing. The 2021-22 team had the scoring spread around, whereas this current iteration of the Avs will likely end up with a much higher percentage of goal share amongst their top 3 forwards alone if something is not done at the trade deadline. The whole point of this convoluted exercise is simply to say that the Avs are not getting contributions from across the lineup on a consistent basis. This causes the top line to shoulder a massive amount of responsibility and to try and supplement the lack of scoring, and could perhaps be contributed to fatigue. Stage 2, anger.
Disappointed!
I could argue I feel anger and sadness after every Avalanche loss, but I more often than not feel anger. And this is the emotion that is more prevalent following a loss, due to the fact that I feel that all of the Avalanche's losses are ones they could have won. Yes, there are rare exceptions where I feel the Avalanche were simply outplayed, even when they themselves played well. Excuse me. However, these games feel fewer and farther between, as especially with these last 2 games, those being St. Louis and Nashville, exacerbating the point that the Avalanche more often than not beat themselves for one or a variety of factors that we have or will discuss over the course of this segment. Now that we are getting into the stretch run of the season and the playoff picture is really beginning to take shape, I decided to take a look back at all of the Avalanche's losses up to this point in the season and figure out how many of those losses were to playoff teams or non-playoff teams. Now, in the East, it can be a bit of a slippery slope as there are many bubble teams. For the sake of clarity, we will consider the 15 other teams currently in the playoff spot as of the time of writing and presentation to be our playoff teams. So today, when I wrote it, 225-25, a little bit of shakeup, although there is some wiggle room for bubble teams like the Bruins, Blue Jackets, and Rangers, as they're all 2 points or less out of a wild card spot. So as of today, prior to the game against the New Jersey Devils and Avalanche, against the New Jersey Devils, even if you include the Devils since they didn't lose, the Avalanche are now 33-24-2 or 34-24-2. 26 losses, including OT losses. Of those losses following a rule set, 12 of them, or 46%, have come to non-playoff teams or teams currently out of the playoffs. You could even argue more, considering they have lost twice to Vancouver, who has just managed to stay in the second wildcard spot, despite Calgary holding it a majority of the season. But again, Vancouver is the one in the playoff spot as of today. To take it another step, Some of these losses have come against goalies who post a season save percentage under 900. Clarify, the goaltender as a whole on the season, 24-25 season, has an under 900 save percentage and not just in the game in question or over their career. We're just focusing on this season specifically. And they may have a better or worse save percentage in the particular game against the Avalanche. In fact, of their 26 losses, 11 of them, or 42%, have come against goaltenders with an under 900 save percentage on the season. The Avalanche are touted as a high-flying offensive machine, and yet they are consistently stoned by guys who can't even stop a beach ball and are dragging down the league average. These are the goalies that are slowing down an Avalanche offense that is supposed to be able to score at will. Yet when they come across any of these guys, you could bet the Avalanche will lose that game. Even then, there were some goaltenders not counted who are riding the line with a .900 save percentage and save percentages below league average, which is I think at 902 last we checked. All the worse with the fact that the Avalanche have lost to teams in the bottom 5 of the league 4 times. That might not sound like a lot, but 2 of those bottom 5 are in the Avalanche's division, meaning they have lost out on 8 points, technically 16, but they couldn't beat Nashville or Chicago. The Avs have lost to Chicago both times they have met this season with 2 more meetings to go. All this to say that the Avalanche are missing out on points that could easily put them into 3rd or 2nd in their division, but they simply keep losing. Most of the time, it's because their offense simply cannot score. In 12 of those losses, in fact, the Avalanche scored 1 goal or less. If we bump it up to 2 goals or less, since league scoring is up and is clearly needed to win games, the number jumps to 20. 20 of the Avalanche's losses this season, 77%. They couldn't manage more than 2 goals. One of the most offensively deadly teams in recent memory simply couldn't score. They weren't always outscored severely in these contests either, sometimes only by 1 or 2 goals, especially when the new goaltending tandem was brought in. But that's all it took, because this Avalanche team simply cannot score. All this is to say, these losses fill me with anger. Another drink of water. Hydration is important, and Dom would certainly agree with this. Wonder what he would say to all of this. I know he'll listen back to this, though, and I'm sure he'll bring some great thoughts and notes on this segment next week. But we'll see. Stay hydrated out there, everybody. It is important to be drinking. Stage 3, bargaining. This is management's job. Much bargaining has occurred for the Avalanche this entire season. You look at the team the Avalanche dressed in Game 1 versus the team they dressed in their most recent game, and it's a completely different one from the start of the season, for better or for worse. The first bargain was Alexander Georgiev for Mackenzie Blackwood, as well as Jussi Sonnen for Scott Wedgwood. It is almost more impressive that Chris MacFarland found a way to strategically and intelligently offload the worst goaltending tandem in the league. Make no mistake that if the Avalanche had continued to play with these 2 in net, we would not be in the playoffs. Full stop, no question. Which Dom would say, yeah, and I agree. And then he would go on a great point about why our goaltending was ass and why Mackenzie Blackwood is amazing. Some of these things both of the Woods have had to do has been nothing short of remarkable, and I've said over and over that Georgiev and Onninen could and cannot do what these 2, particularly Blackwood, do on a nightly basis. How Chris MacFarland fooled the equally as intelligent, if not more so, Mike Greer into taking one of, if not the worst goalie in the league off his hands is an absolutely incredible move. This move paid off, as goaltending was, at least at the time, the Avalanche's biggest weakness, and no longer will be for the foreseeable future. He has also made some smart cap moves, such as the Tucker Poolman move. He not only offloads other contracts, but takes in an LTIR player who will never play to expertly open up more cap room for an already cap-strapped team. A win. Amongst many other small bargains and trades, such as bringing in Juuso Parssinen. Then, the big one happens. The Avalanche part with their multi-time leading goal scorer and core staple Mikko Rantanen. Still doesn't feel real even now. In return, you get Martin Necas and Jack Drury. It's much too early to call it a win, but also too early to call it a loss, although the early returns are incredibly promising, especially the fact that Martin Necas had another 3-point night against the Devils. This man is insane. I love watching Martin Necas. I miss Mikko every day, and if there was some way for him to come back, who knows? Who knows? Maybe he'll re-sign here in free agency. I doubt it, everyone. I do doubt it, but clearly crazier things have happened. But after everything that has happened and has been bargained this season, what has that left the Avalanche? It's left them with a lack of identity. I'm not the first person to say this, but I do agree with those who have stated it before me. The high-flying offensive Avs seemingly appear to be no more, although I am of the mindset that they could reemerge, but right now they're not here. And that's obvious going back to our previous points about losses. Whenever the Avs are losing, particularly after the addition of Blackwood, they're only losing by a goal or two. Blackwood and goaltending keeps them in every game, but they simply cannot score. So even if the odds aren't insurmountable, this team isn't coming back. In fact, if we look at the team's losses since after acquiring Blackwood December 9th, of 13 losses, 8 of them have been by 2 goals or less, and 4 of them were only by a goal. This leaves us with the question of how do the Avalanche approach the trade deadline? I say defense be damned. It's clearly doing a decent job most nights because the Avs are limiting the goals fairly successfully as well as killing penalties. But they're unable to overcome even the smallest deficits, and teams are exploiting that weakness heavily. Not to mention, as previously stated, the only real line that threatens to score is the top line. Any other line out there on the ice is just wasted minutes at this point in time. The Avs have to address their depth scoring and their leadership. This team, plain and simple, cannot win like how it is now. Injuries are a thing, and while I don't want it to be an excuse for any previous, current, or future points I'll make, it has to be considered when thinking about how the Avalanche's chemistry has been damaged. No one seems to be 100% confident in who they are playing with, and the team just doesn't feel like one unit anymore. Lines lack lethality. Anyway, lines lack lethality and fear that people used to discuss. Every year, every game this team doesn't have Gabriel Landeskog in the lineup becomes more noticeable. This team needs a leader on the ice, and while the Mikko Rantanen trade will hopefully end up positive in the long run, in the short term, that is a portion of your leadership core no longer in the locker room. Veteran players like Andrew Cogliano are retired, and this team doesn't have their captain to go to battle with them. All this is to say, I don't know who this Avalanche team is right now. It can be honestly a struggle to watch them play some nights because you're just praying someone will do something, and no one is right now, and it is beyond frustrating as a fan of this team. Again, you might say Devils, but we'll talk about it, I think, coming up here in the final 2 sections that I actually wrote today before recording this episode. So we will talk about how the Devils game kind of factors into it, because I know it was a great game. It was a very complete game. But again, we'll get into it. Stage 4, depression.
All around me are familiar faces.
I am certain that I wanted to write something else here originally, but as it stands right now, as I finish this segment prior to recording this episode, I think rather than going on more stat and analytical rants, I will just speak my mind. There is a real chance that Gabriel Landeskog never plays another NHL game. This isn't me saying that I've given up, but his absence has hurt the team in many ways, and I think he knows that. We've spoken about it before, but the Avalanche, as a team, aren't just hurting from Landeskog's absence because they are missing their leadership off and on the ice, only so much you can do in the locker room. They are missing an incredible top 6 winger who was a 30-goal scorer, tip-in master, a fantastic teammate who stood up for everyone on the bench, but it also hurts the Avalanche's roster as a whole. Not only because there is a massive, unfillable Gabe Landeskog-sized hole in it, but because $7 million is not meaningless money. The roster construction and management have had to tiptoe and walk on eggshells around Landeskog's contract because they would be in a massive bind since this team operates up to the cap anyways if Landeskog suddenly were ready to make a return. Because of that, you can't necessarily use that $7 million because there has never been a definitive answer of if he's ready to return or when he's going to return. This causes the team to make some moves and possibly not re-sign or sign players that they could or should have to supplement possibly not re-sign or sign players that they could or should, and then they have to supplement elsewhere, which leads to problems. I won't dwell on the what ifs, but you always wonder as a fan of this team what could have been had this injury never occurred. Now, don't confuse my discussion here with me giving up on Landeskog. I certainly have not, although it is hard to ignore the doubt creeping in as the third full season without the captain on ice is rapidly coming to a close. The other side of it is, with everything I've talked about in the previous sections, and there are always better and more in-depth ways I could look at it, and I would love to revisit this at season's end. And I mean, especially in the denial section, I definitely would like to do more there, but time is a factor. I don't know what the solution is right now. Probably why I'm not in the GM's chair, but that's why it is frankly so depressing, because I know that this team can and should do better. However, it's hard to ignore the absolutely ridiculous and seemingly unfair injury luck this team has been plagued with. These players deserve to play and fans deserve to watch them. And while injury is an occupational hazard of being a professional athlete, particularly a hockey player, it feels as if some souls were sold to win this 2022 Stanley Cup. And this is the repercussions of that the Avalanche must now endure because of it. I'm not making excuses for this team. I've never tried to. There are glaring flaws that they'll need to find ways to overcome. I won't need to find ways to overcome them. That's not my job. I just sit here and talk about them on the internet. Water break. If you had a water cup next to you while you're listening to this episode, drink it right frickin' now. Important. Stage 5, acceptance. The question via Arif Dean of Colorado Hockey Now is this season worth saving? This can be tough to answer when you see how this Avalanche team plays on some nights. They are violently inconsistent, and you're unsure as to what team is going to step out onto the ice that given night. As we referred to them time and time again, when the 2021-22 roster stepped out, if you were the other team, you were sweating bullets. That 22 roster was a monster and set the record for most wins for an Avalanche team ever. And even if they were down in a game, regular season, or in the playoffs, they were never out of it, ever. Today, sometimes you'll get a team who still has you'll get a team that still has the same coaching staff from back when they won that cup, who will wow you with a comeback or offensive explosions like against the Devils. And other nights you will experience what it's like when even the brightest stars cannot score on even the worst goaltenders, i.e. St. Louis and Nashville and many other games this season. This reminds me of what I wanted to put in the depression section, though. If Dom were here, I would ask him, what do we always say is the quality that separates a goalie from the rest? What makes them great? Which he would say, consistency. And I would say, that's right, Dom. And I would throw him his Scooby snack. Jokes aside, that same principle applies to teams. And that is why we've seen the Jets and Capitals succeed to such an extreme degree this season. They have found a way to nearly every game be the exact same team as the previous one and perform. That sounds confusing now that I'm reading it back. Be the exact same team as the previous one from the previous night. You all know what I'm trying to say. And perform at that high level and high expectations they've set for themselves night in and night out. No team will win all 82 games. It's simply impossible, although the 22-23 Bruins thought differently. But this Avalanche team has lost very winnable games, and everyone will say that about their own team, but based on the previous sections, you should know what I mean at this point. And if you don't, leave a comment, and I will explain it betterer, because I am all by myself right now. It's 11:42 p.m. I'm alone in my room, and it's sad. Damn, y'all didn't need to hear that. I'm sorry you all have to put up with me alone. Anyway. This team is a flawed one, which has led to a loss in identity for them. However, unlike some, I do believe there is still a chance to bring back the identity the Avalanche once coveted. They haven't lost their speed and, in fact, got faster once Martin Necas joined the team. Both special teams are now clicking, and while the inconsistencies of the season on the season as a whole will show lower percentages, everything is trending in a positive direction. This team is still led and centered around Nathan MacKinnon and Cale Makar, but I said it would take Val Nichushkin and Gabe Landeskog to win the cup, because without either of those players, this team hasn't made it past the second round. Now, I'm in no way implying that the Avalanche's success hinges on just two guys, as hockey is the ultimate team sport. Nonetheless, their importance cannot be understated beyond just the tangible that they bring. No, to win and reach the top of the mountain again, the Avalanche will need a complete team effort and a complete team to do it. The ball is now in management's court. They've made the biggest trade of the year, and now it's on them to capitalize on that. To answer the question, do I think this season was worth saving? Absolutely, I do. This team is still in their win now window, and they still have the talent and staff to win another cup. But there are holes in the ship that need to be fully repaired and not just patched over. Their position in the first wild card is concerning because the lowest seeded team to ever win the cup was the 2012 LA Kings, who finished third in the Pacific and were the 8th seeded team. Fun fact, they finished third in the division in 2014 when they won the cup also. However, a wildcard team has never won the Stanley Cup, and history does tell us a lot in hockey. The Avalanche must get to at least third in the division to even have a chance, unless they're ready to make some history. And that's a very attainable goal, but they'll need to buckle down and win when it matters. That's what their divisional rivals keep doing, and something that I have said time and time again. Regardless of the outcomes of this season, however, nothing can ever take away my love for this sport and for the Colorado Avalanche. I will cheer for them with my dying breath, and it is an honor to talk about them every week, even if they cause me excruciating pain and mental agony in some of those weeks. Now, just to briefly talk about the Devils, I'll go ahead and scroll through some of these here because it was a fun game to attend. First of all, Valeri Nichushkin makes his return. Actually, pause everything. First of all, thank you all for joining me in that 5 stages of the Avalanche. Sports are stressful, and sometimes I question why Dom, why any of us put ourselves through the mental gymnastics and torture of watching our teams, because sports are such a fickle thing, right? The outcome is never guaranteed, yet we will buy tickets for the game. We will, let me perseverate on that one. We will buy tickets to the game, even if we are not sure that our team will win, but we go for the thrill and for the love of the game. And sometimes we leave disappointed. I don't know where I want to go with this past this. Again, I'm sorry you all have to sit with just me this week. This must be very challenging. And it's not that fun without Dom. I like having him to bounce ideas off of, especially some of the ones that I've had here today. So can't wait till he's back next week. But anyway, Devils. Valeri Nichushkin came back. Now, for me, I didn't think his speed was there, but his hands and execution were. And it just looked like, he positionally was very sound, and he just knew where he needed to be and when he needed to accelerate. But I mean, man, that is a big body on the ice, and he is so good at protecting the puck, but also getting it back. I mean, him on the forecheck is incredible, and he's one of the only dudes besides like Arturi Lehkonen who plays on both the power play and the penalty kill. And man, he's just a beast. I'm so happy that he's back. And I was really scared because multiple times in that game, I thought someone else was going off injured. Luke Hughes about tried to murder Arturi Lehkonen and his own goaltender for that matter. He slashes him and sends Arturi down into the ice and then into Jake Allen. Jake Allen's down on the ice. Arturi Lehkonen's down on the ice, but everybody gets up and is okay. Although Arturi looked like he was laboring for a second, so it was, but he ended up okay. Then later you see Necas get fucking tripped up and goes into a total spin cycle, but he also ends up being okay. So it was a stressful game because, again, we've said it before, it feels like every time someone comes back, someone else just gets injured, and that is definitely not what we want to be seeing. Now, the game, I think their first, put it this way, the first period, great. Second period, third period, incredible. You really wish Mackenzie Blackwood could have gotten the shutout, only because this team has already shut out the Devils, and it was a pass, or it was a shot right from the middle of the ice between the circles by Jack Hughes, and it just gets right past him. Not to be too critical on this guy, because I've talked about it before, but man, Oliver Chillington just did not look good again. And it makes me nervous every time that he was on the ice. I really did want to see Valerian Nichushkin make my dreams come true and score a goal, but it didn't happen. But what did happen is the power play scored twice, including an absolutely insane goal by Nathan MacKinnon, who, if you haven't already seen it, I don't know how, but I will link it in the description of this video. Podcast episode. What the hell am I saying? It's not good, everybody. The closer we get to midnight, after we hit midnight, like, I just go total monkey mode. I'm going to lose all brain function at that point. Anyway, Cale Makar fires it off the back wall, which clearly is what he intended to do, to try and set up a pass from there, but it goes off the back wall, bounces off the back of the net, and Nathan MacKinnon somehow has the wherewithal to tap it into the back of the net. I am not original for this idea, but it seems like every time Leon Draisaitl, but I do agree with it, every time Leon Draisaitl tries to take the scoring lead and does momentarily, Nathan MacKinnon's like, don't like that, and then we'll go out and have an insane game the next night. I mean, he was just an absolute stud out there. And I mean, there were several near misses. I am happy that Casey Middlestat did end up finally getting his 10th goal of the season, although you would like to see hopefully more from him if they decide to keep him around through the trade deadline. To be perfectly honest with you, everybody, I have genuinely no idea what the Avalanche are about to do this trade deadline. Because every time people speculate on what the Avalanche are going to do, Chris MacFarland finds a way to pull off the most insane, or at the very least unexpected trade. No one expected Bo Byram for Casey Middlestat last season. Nobody had that on their fucking trade boards or on their rumor mills. So who knows at this point what they're actually going to do. I am highly doubtful that the Avalanche do what anybody actually expects them to do. And then, of course, Logan O'Connor got a nice garbage time goal from Parker Kelly. Fun fact is that my mom said at the start of the game that we would end up with 5 goals. And I really did not think that that was going to be the case, because you're going into, I think, 10 minutes left in the third, and it was only 2-1. So I thought, I'll still take the win, would like maybe one more, but doesn't look like we're going to get to 5. And then, of course, the Avs offensively explode in the third. And what was great about this is the fact that after the Devils scored to make it 2-1, they weren't rattled by this. First of all, the fact that they got the second goal before the Devils got their first is great, because the game wasn't tied. They were still ahead. But they didn't allow this to rattle them at all, and they just kept playing their game. And evidently it paid off, because they made Allen so mad he smashed his stick, and they pulled him even though there was only like 2 minutes left. So that's pretty remarkable. Although I do feel bad for Allen, because frankly, he played a really good game, and all of a sudden the Avs just kind of shat on him and the rest of the Devils. But positionally, the Avs looked really great. The defense was really sound. And I mean, there was a few times where the Devils hemmed particularly the top line in their own zone, but I mean, they never broke through -1 time. So regardless of the criticism, the Avs walked away with quite the dominant win. And I just wanted to highlight this game because obviously I didn't really use it as a main talking point. And I mean, I was using the season as a whole for the 5 Stages of Grief segment, but I did want to highlight the Devils game just briefly because it was a really great game. So yeah. Now, if Dom were here, we would do a nice little intro. You know what? I'll read it for you anyway. Well, Dom, now that I've cried for the past 45 minutes to an hour, probably would have been about that time if you were here, it's your turn to cry about the Sharks and their several near victories. Defeat snatched from the jaws of victory, as you would say. Also, let's not forget, you have some pre-trade deadline power rankings for us to muse and mull over. It's time for In the Tank with me. It's me. You're in the tank with me this week, everyone. I'm gonna let you escape. Okay. Okay, I'll let you surface for air. But first, I will read to you just the brief notes that Dom went ahead and sent to me that he would like me to read over. He didn't really have any Sharks notes prepared, so we'll talk more about his power rankings. I would like to say also that, unfortunately, the Sharks lost again tonight. After leading, I think, the Canadians, they ended up going to OT where Cole Caulfield scored an absolutely beautiful deke. I really like Cole, but of course I want the Sharks to win. And before I read Dom's notes, what was frustrating is, from what I could see in a lot of their games that they lost, the Sharks were leading, but their opponents were simply able to get back into the games, and the Sharks have just been fodder for OT wins and comebacks for other teams, which is so disappointing because you can see the brilliance in this team. This team can score, but defensively, they are just so unsound. And of course, when your goaltending tandem is Alexander Georgiev and Vitek Vanacek, even on their best nights, just not going to get you that game-stealing save that you need. So to read to you what he said, the Sharks quote, "The Sharks lost in 2 close games against the Canadian teams in the hunt. The first loss was 3-2 at Calgary, where the Sharks were buzzing early and looked the better team with many dings off the post. They had strong goaltending in both games and almost beat Winnipeg in a goalie duel from Vanacek. Unfortunately, they were unable to hold on to a 1-0 lead late in the third against the Jets and eventually lost to the league's best team in 2-1. In the 2-1 OT. And that was not the first time the Jets did that to a team this week. They did the same thing to the Blues. And to be perfectly frank, I don't think Dom would have said anything that I think hasn't already been said about the Sharks up to this point in the season. And I feel bad because at this point, it's just feeling like second verse, same as the first, with every game that we're going through now with the Sharks. Their problems are clear and apparent, and there really isn't a lot of new news to report. And unfortunately, they are likely to be sellers at this trade deadline. So I'm sure Dom is not super thrilled at that fact because I know there are guys that he likes, but obviously Mike Greer is focusing on the youth movement who can all come into their own once the Sharks get into their win now window with Macklin Celebrini and Yaroslav Askarov. So it's likely that people like Mario Ferraro, Luke Cunnin, maybe even somebody like Jake Wallman will get moved for other assets, younger assets, picks, things like that. Although I agree that it's perhaps time to start accumulating that player talent rather than just picks, because man, oh man, do the Sharks have a lot of those in the upcoming drafts. But we'll go ahead and take a look at Dom's power rankings, and we will harshly judge them together. So everyone, it's time for some pre-trade deadline power rankings. So starting from your bottom here, Dom unfortunately has listed the San Jose Sharks as the number 32 team, which has dropped them 3 spots from where they were last time we did our power rankings on, it looks like January 5th for the new year. And I mean, I'll talk about obviously them. I can agree because I think at this point they have dropped all the way to the bottom of the league at this point. Let's go ahead and take a look here. League. Yes, the Sharks do currently sit number 39, although they are only 2 points behind the Chicago Blackhawks. So it's going to be a flip-flop for which one of those two ends up taking the true bottom by the end of the year. But it is unfortunate because the Sharks did show a little bit of promise, but unfortunately, as the season went on, just the better teams began to show themselves. And right now, the Sharks are just in a position where they have the talent, I think, to be good upcoming here in the next couple seasons, but they just don't quite have the execution that they need. And it's that finishing power that we've talked about over and over again, where they have led in these games, but they failed to keep the lead, and pretty much an opponent always manages to get back in and somehow steal the win away from them. So once they can figure out that particular issue, and I do agree with Dom that it's defense, then they'll start to probably win more. But I really want them to get to 20 wins on the season. They currently sit at 15, 36, and 9 with looks like 22 games remaining. So if they can win 5 of those 22 left, they can improve from last year, which I believe that they can do. This team can win. This is going to have to be against other ass teams. Number 31, he has is the Nashville Predators, who have dropped 1 spot from their previous ranking. And what's funny about the Predators is tonight, they ended up beating the Winnipeg Jets, ending their win streak at 11. And they are the only team to beat the Winnipeg Jets twice this season. Ain't that just a bitch? It's always the ass teams, isn't it? It's never the good teams that beat the top teams more than once in the season. It's the ass ones. So evidently, the Nashville Predators of the Winnipeg Jets is number. Number 30 is the Chicago Blackhawks, who moved up 2 spots from their last ranking. I don't know if anybody saw the 1,000 Bedard stare, but man, that kid looks in pain. And I do have pity for him. He desperately needs help. And we have to remember, though, again, that this is a child. He is 19 years old, and he has a fuck ton of responsibility placed on his shoulders for what he needs to do with this team, who's not giving him a lot to work with. They really do need to help him out by giving him something. So let's hope that they can do something in the offseason here. I have a strong feeling that Mikko Rantanen will sign to the Chicago Blackhawks in the offseason, but we shall see. Number 29, he has is the Buffalo Sabres, who have moved up 2 spots, who will likely once again miss the playoffs, which is just a tragedy. Another team I'm curious to see what they're going to do at the trade deadline, because they want to move out players like Bowen Byram and Dylan Cousins, although I don't know if it's in their best interest to do that. It feels like you'd want to build around those guys, not take them away. Because every time it feels like the Buffalo Sabres trade players like that, they end up becoming Stanley Cup champions. So tread carefully, Buffalo. Number 28 is the Seattle Kraken, who dropped 5 spots from their previous rank. I'm not going to say anything about the Kraken because they're booty cheeks and I don't like them. So, boo-boo. Number 27 is the Pittsburgh Penguins, who dropped 6 spots from their previous ranking, which I think is perfectly reasonable because, man, not only have they been getting beaten, but they've been getting blown out of the water. I need to see if they did end up losing tonight. Let's take a look here. They did end up coming back in overtime, which is surprising, but I mean, that's good for them. Looks like Evgeny Malkin got the OT winner. But I mean, this team is sunk. It's sunk. And I don't understand why Sidney Crosby is going to tarnish the end of his career to stay with the Pittsburgh Penguins. I understand legacy and everything. Already said it last week. Ray Bourque, this motherfucker. No one is going to hold it against you if you leave Pittsburgh for 2 seasons to play with the Avs to chase another cup. No one's going to think you're bad for doing that. Everybody wants you to do it. What pride are you holding on to staying on a sinking ship? Captain goes down with the ship. Fuck that. Come and play, Sid. Let them bring in the youth. Let Kyle Dubas do what he wants to do. Don't retire in solitude atop a fucking floundering Pittsburgh team. They're not going to be good enough by the time you're ready to retire unless you retire at 45. Number 26, Dom has is the New York Islanders, who moved up 2 spots. They did go on a bit of a run, but it's still pretty doubtful that they will end up making the playoffs. Number 20, especially in the East. Number 25 is the St. Louis Blues, who dropped 7 spots from their previous position. Dom says here, out of playoff contention at this point, in my opinion, and I am inclined to agree. While there is still an outside shot, I believe when we watched the game, it said there was like a 4% chance for them to make the playoffs. And with the other teams in the Central and Pacific divisions in the West in the hunt, I just don't see it happening. Number 24 he has is the Anaheim Ducks, who moved no places. This is actually the first one who I think I would move a little higher only because from what I've been hearing from other sources, the Ducks aren't totally out of it yet. I mean, yeah, they're not totally out of it. They're at 59 points and they have 2 games in hand over a lot of other teams in the Pacific Division. So, I mean, in theory, if they went on a run, they could kind of make up some ground here and get back into it. Although they are behind St. Louis, but I don't know. I don't think it's impossible. But again, it'll be interesting to see what they do at the deadline, especially with people like John Gibson and Trevor Zegras. John Gibson's like, I want to be an Oiler. And now the Oilers are like, we don't want a goaltender. So who knows? Number 23 is the Philadelphia Flyers, who I would move even lower. Dom moved them up 3 spots, but I disagree. They have just continued to lose. Number 22 is the Montreal Canadiens, which fell 2 spots, which totally fair. They went on that run. They were in the wild card, and they have just fallen right back out of it, which is just a shame, honestly. And they currently sit 5 points out of that wild card spot between Columbus and Detroit. Look at that. There you go. You know, Ottawa's holding it for a while. It'll be fun to see who ends up with the wild card spots there, but that's very interesting. Number 21 is the Utah Hockey Club, who dropped 5 spots, although who are still somewhat in the hunt for a wild card spot, although I also believe that there's probably not a chance that they sneak in there. Number 20 is the Boston Bruins, who fell 6 spots from the, Utah fell 5 spots, by the way. Boston Bruins fell 6 spots from their previous ranking, which I think the Bruins are beginning to understand that their window is closed. This team is just not going to get it done anymore, and they're not the scary threat that they were of seasons past. And so to me, I think it's likely you see them be some type of seller at the deadline. I don't think it's worth their time to try and accumulate rentals or assets to try and win at this point. Number 19 is the New York Rangers, who rose 8 spots, which is actually not the biggest rise in this list. It's actually the 3rd biggest rise looking ahead. They are surprisingly back in the hunt, as Dom says, but it is a little too late. Although, who knows, Dom? Who knows? With how the East is shaping out, you can't truly say if they're out of it yet. They could honestly sneak in there, but I secretly hope that they don't, because I would like to see the Senators or Columbus or Detroit make the playoffs. Because at this point, fuck the Rangers. They don't need to make it. They've dug their own graves. Now they must lie in it. Number 18 is going to be the Ottawa Senators, who fell 1 spot, and they have fallen back a bit with the losing streak. I didn't realize this, but they're now 4 points, same as the Rangers and the Bruins, out of that wild card spot. Although I definitely would put them above the Rangers and the Bruins, as Dom has done here, because I feel like of those 3, they have the best chance to sneak back into the playoffs. They've had some good play this season, but they do kind of get streaky, is how it's seen to me. Number 17 is the Calgary Flames, who fell 2 spots. Not much to say here other than they were holding their wild card spot. They could definitely steal it back from Vancouver, as they only sit 1 point out of it between them and Vancouver. So I think it'll be a battle between them. Number 16 is the Columbus Blue Jackets, who rose 6 spots. And then number 15 is the Vancouver Canucks, although I would actually swap Columbus and Calgary, because I think Columbus and Detroit should be 14-15, because he has Detroit as 14 here. Because I think Columbus and Detroit are kind of very similar with where they're at right now. They're playing well, they're winning games. And I mean, the Wings have looked fucking fantastic under Todd McClellan. But as for that's another movement I would make. But the Columbus Blue Jackets rose 6 spots. The Vancouver Canucks rose 4 spots. Dom noted here, every game matters in their battle with Calgary for the final wild card, which obviously I just said. The Detroit Red Wings, he had rise 11 spots. Wow. That is the largest movement on our power rankings since the beginning of the new year, which rightfully so. They managed to battle and get that wild card spot with a lot of strong play, a heavy win streak, and a much, much better power play. I believe it might be number one right now, although I could be misremembering. But yes, I think Detroit and Columbus really are kind of tied for 14-15 right there right now. They've been really good. So can't say much else beyond that. Here Dom has at 13 and 12 the New Jersey Devils, and the Tampa Bay Lightning. New Jersey falling 5 spots and Tampa Bay going up 1. I was going to disagree, but I think he's actually kind of right on the nose here, because Tampa has 2 games in hand over New Jersey, even though they're not in the same division, and they have 72 points. So, man, that Metro division is locked up. Washington has it on lock over every other team. They are 12 points ahead of Carolina. Although the Atlantic division could honestly be won by any of the teams that are currently occupying the top 3 spots. I think those top 3 teams are the top 3 teams, although third place could be threatened. But I think it could be either Florida, Toronto, or Tampa Bay. And I've really underestimated Tampa Bay. They've come out to be a much better team than I have thought them to be. I thought they would fall off eventually, but they have proven me fucking wrong. Water break. Next at 11 is the Los Angeles Kings, who fell 5 spots. I think about on the money with that one, because they are currently 3rd in the Pacific. Evidently, Vegas has taken back the Pacific. I did not know this, and I'll get to them in a second. I thought Edmonton still sat like closer to them than they did. That's really interesting. Okay, well, about on the money there. Number 10 he has is the Carolina Hurricanes, who moved up 1 spot. The Minnesota Wild are number 9, who have fallen 4 spots from last time. Number 8 is the Edmonton Oilers, who are on a 4-game losing streak. They fell 1 spot, and they've been on a losing streak since coming back from the 4 Nations break. They have looked rough. They have gotten blown up, including by the Flyers. So tough stuff. Number 7 is going to be, thank God they are not anywhere near the top and have fallen 6 spots, is going to be the Vegas Golden Knights. Fuck you, Rico. Yeah, that's right. You didn't think you thought I'd forget? You thought I'd forget even though Dom's not here? You're wrong. Number 6 is the Toronto Maple Leafs, who fell 4 spots. Have not paid attention to the Leafs literally whatsoever. Number 5, Dom put as the Colorado Avalanche, who moved up 5 spots. I'm going to be so real with you, Dom. I love you, buddy. I really appreciate that. I definitely think the Avalanche should be above teams like Detroit, Vancouver. But I definitely think they should be hovering around the 12th, 13th spot here. I do agree with the league's power rankings that, I think, especially with the 2 losses to 2 non-playoff teams coming out of the 4 Nations break, it was not a good look. And just the inconsistency of this Avalanche team, as we just talked about, I don't think they deserve to be ranked quite that high, but I appreciate the sentiment, my friend. But I think some of these other teams are currently performing better than the Avalanche. Although I think Dom's argument would be that, like with LA and Edmonton, the Avalanche have 70 points, and then LA and Edmonton each have 70 and 72 respectively, and then Minnesota also only has 72. So I understand that he's not just going on who has more points than who. So I respect that, but I do still disagree that the Avalanche actually deserve to be ranked this high. Number 4 he has is the Florida Panthers, rising 5 spots from last time. Number 3 is the Dallas Stars, who rose 9 spots, second biggest movement from last power rankings, which I definitely think is fair given their current state of play. They've really started to solidify their second place in the Central, although they're still not uncatchable. Number 2 and number 1 are the Washington Capitals and the Winnipeg Jets, respectively. The Washington Capitals moved up 1, and the Winnipeg Jets moved up 3. He says here to highlight the win streak, which definitely can agree with that. As much as I hate to talk about the Jets and their successes, they did go on an 11-game win streak, although it was almost broken a few times. But to their credit, man, their 6-on-5 play managed to get them back into numerous games, including one against the Blues and one against the Sharks, in which they managed to come back and win it in overtime. So credit where credit is due. This team is simply not losing right now. But what I ultimately wanted to say about this Jets team and what's going to be really interesting going forward is the team who wins the President's Trophy. You know, President's Trophy curse. It could be them or the Capitals, and we'll see if that affects their ability to hang in there in any way. Now, I also wonder, because I think about that Bruins team of the past, and I think I brought up this point a long time ago. When you have a team that does this insanely well in the regular season, it truly does not always translate into the postseason. Keep in mind, even when the Avalanche posted 56 wins, which was a franchise record in the 21-22 season, they still did not win the President's Trophy that year. That honor belonged to the Florida Panthers. So they, by all means, were not necessarily, quote, the best team, although they were consistently atop the power rankings. They were an insane fucking force. So I do wonder for these Jets if it will translate. And that's all I'll say for that. But these were your power rankings. So thank you very much for that, Dom. I'm surprised I got through all of those in only a little over 15 minutes. I thought I was talking about them for much longer than that, but nonetheless, you know, meaningful conversation there. So everybody, thank you very much to Dom. Give him a round of applause since he couldn't be here. This is obviously going to be a much shorter episode this week, but you know, I don't have anybody to bounce my brilliant ideas off of, and I'm sure you're all honestly getting sick of hearing me yammer on anyway. I did have a note here for thoughts on the Four Nations final game between USA and Canada. But this is a section I truly think I'm going to save, even though it's going to be so incredibly delayed. I really want to hear Dom's thoughts on it because that game was amazing. I will say this. The NHL succeeded in growing the game of hockey. People who didn't even watch the sport or sports in general were talking about the final between the USA and Canada. And I said, I think in the last episode, that it would be a crime if we didn't get OT for this game, and that is exactly what we got. Do definitely want to bitch and moan about Connor McDavid getting the golden goal, but so excited that Nathan MacKinnon got the tournament MVP, first of all. And I mean, you couldn't have asked for a better game. And I know people who rooted for USA are mad as fuck at Matthew Tkachuk, so love the drama there. We'll talk about it next week. But for now, we'll just keep rolling here, and this episode is gonna just be as long as it ends up being. I appreciate y'all sticking with me for the hour here, so we'll get into kind of our ending bits here. I don't really have our news from around the league this week because I only had so much time to prepare what I did prepare. So I hope you all still enjoyed it nonetheless. Well, your 3 players of the week. And it was tough to give anyone the 3 players of the week. And I honestly didn't want to after the Nashville and St. Louis games, but there were still things I felt deserved recognition. And I mean, after the New Jersey game, yeah. Number 3 was Cale Makar for getting his 400th point, 3rd fastest defenseman to ever do it. You're witnessing greatness, everybody. He is not the best defensive defenseman, but man, he's the best all around. Of course, I'm going to be biased. He is the best offensive defenseman easily. That's why he gets compared to Bobby Orr all the time, because Bobby Orr is the best offensive defenseman. Cale truly is a very, very special player, and it is an honor to be able to watch him every night. Number 2 is Mackenzie Blackwood for being the only guy who seems to show up on a nightly basis. Every night, he seems to be the only player who shows up, and when everybody else doesn't show up, he still does. So thank you, Mackenzie. Number 1 is going to be Nathan MacKinnon for earning that Four Nations MVP. He truly was a dog out there. So super glad that he was recognized. That is what you wanted to hear. 4 goals in the tournament. Yeah, he was a monster out there. He was scoring like crazy. And he was not selfish. He was shooting the damn puck, which is what John Cooper wanted them to do. So Nathan MacKinnon did exactly what was expected. So you hope that that translates now back here and that he'll shoot the puck a little more even now. He can definitely still hit that 30 goal mark. And he's just been an Apple machine this year. So first to 90 points again, or no, not again, but first to 90 points this year. Sixth straight 90-point campaign for Nathan MacKinnon. Obviously going to pass 100 again. Dude is just a dog. He's insane. Love Nathan MacKinnon. But anyways, everybody, here are your fun facts for the week. You didn't think I would forget that I promised you 2 of them. I remembered, everyone. Don't you worry. So, fun fact number 1, I will not lie, is a bit of a mixture of both a fact and some news. So, here you go. I think I now know what the insiders were talking about when they said that the Mikko Rantanen trade wasn't the craziest thing to happen in the next 24 to 48 hours. It has come out that the Avalanche, after trading Rantanen, expected to trade for JT Miller and have him be their official 2C. They expected him to say yes to Colorado, but as we've seen, he said no, preferring instead to be a Ranger again. JT Miller did not say yes to the dress. Here's your second fun fact, and this one more pertains to our foreign nations and international play. The USA and Canada have played each other many times in international best-on-best tournaments, whether that's in the Olympics, World Cup of Hockey, World Juniors, or the recent Four Nations face-off. It got me thinking, how many times have these teams played each other in a championship game, and what are the results? The teams actually first faced each other in the 1920 Olympics in the very first ice hockey final, where Canada emerged the victor. From there, it can be a little muddy. But per Flow Hockey, going back to the 1976 Canada Cup, the teams have met in the gold medal or championship match 5 times, with Canada holding the edge with 4 wins. However, the teams have obviously met many times outside of this in semifinals and other matchups, which are always heated and full of emotion. So with everything that happened in the most recent Four Nations, I've already said it, it makes me so excited for these Olympics, because USA, I really... whichever team ended up losing that championship game was going to be looking to get their get back in the Olympics. So I really am excited to see if those two end up meeting again in the final, or if somebody else comes from the shadows to take it. We've been seeing a lot of movement on who is going to be playing, who is allowed to play. So it should certainly be a fun time. Damn, I wanted and was hoping that I could get this episode to at least an hour and 30, but at that point it would feel it would feel artificial, and it would feel like I'm just stuffing fluff for the sake of fluff. I mean, this was just my natural cadence of talking and how much that I had to say and how much that I had prepared. There's certainly more that I could have probably said, done, whatever, but in the time that I had, this is what we got. So I really do hope that everybody still enjoyed what I had to present to you this week. It certainly, after doing this for 22 episodes, does not feel the same without Dom. Obviously, if I had a bit more personal time, again, still dealing with a lot in the personal life, I probably would have been able to prepare a little more, perhaps another segment, but it really makes me appreciate all the more, not that I don't appreciate him so much, but it makes me appreciate all the more having Dom here to bounce these ideas off of, because you know, we don't usually go over our notes with each other before we come into the episode, which kind of makes it fun. That's what makes our conversations so organic and entertaining, because we're hearing what each other has to say about our teams and about hockey for the first time that week. And so, yeah, it is a bummer not having him here, but of course we wish him the best with his health, hopefully the best with my health here. And you know, I hope everybody still felt that this episode meets the quality that you have come to expect from us. That all being said, we have seen 2 more followers join our ranks. I think we will go ahead and we will set a goal. We've been getting a lot of listens recently since the Four Nations episode, so we really do appreciate you all tuning in. If you are listening on Spotify, Amazon, which I see a lot of people listen on that Amazon music service, please hit the follow button. Even if you don't want to rate our podcast just yet, just click the one follow button. You can even disable the notifications if you don't want to see when our episodes are coming out every week, although they always come out on Thursdays or Fridays, depending on the week, most of the time Thursdays. But it would really mean a lot if you could click the follow button. I think our goal is by the end of this season, let's get to 25 followers on Spotify. We would greatly, greatly appreciate that. And we would greatly appreciate you telling all the people who you know in your life love Avalanche hockey and who just love hockey in general. There's been, I think, more people coming into the sport, especially after the Four Nations. So we want to be part of the people who help welcome new people into this community. And of course, want to convert more people to Avalanche fans who are maybe not sure of what teams they should root for. So definitely send people our way. We do the best that we can. Of course, we have our own opinions, but we love the sport and we want other people to love it. We want other people to love it too. Well, everyone, the clock is counting down to the final horn. We really appreciate you taking the time to listen to this episode of the Captain Avalanche Fancast. Did you know there is a comment section where you can leave your thoughts and questions? If you have something you want to know about the Avalanche, Sharks, or just hockey in general, leave it below and we'll be happy to try and answer it. There's also a unique poll for you to interact with every episode. The best thing you can do if you like what we're doing here is to follow us on whatever platform you're using and share this podcast everywhere you can, whether that's with your mouse or your mouth. I'm Captain Avalanche Corey, and on behalf of Dom, he is Dom from the Tank. Check out our new episodes every week. Thanks, everyone.